Hi, everyone. Welcome to this second episode of Disruptor Talks. The purpose of this series is to bring you disruptors, people who like to build things and to come here and tell their story. Since we want to get through to the next generation of entrepreneurs, we follow a short form format for these podcasts and try to keep our questions to under 10. As a quick background on us, we are Disruptors Capital. We're an early stage venture capital fund. We invest in technology businesses in India, Southeast Asia, and the US. In a nutshell, we like to invest in businesses that build for a global audience. On that note, I'd like to introduce our guest and founder and CEO of Purple Tutor. For those who don't know, Purple Tutor is an AI-assisted online live tutoring platform which helps develop computational thinking amongst kids by leveraging courses in new age technologies and things like coding, app development, and game design. Gaurav himself is a serial founder, previously heading FinCash as CEO. He's also a media favorite, featuring as ET's top 50 young leaders and several awards from CNBC for being a financial analyst, I would say. Gaurav, it's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you very much, Raj. Very happy to be part of these talks, actually.
Awesome. We'll begin with your journey, which has been most interesting. You spent about 10 years in the banking side of things and before starting FinCash, which seemed like a related thing. But now you are into edtech. Could you walk us through how that transition happened for you?
Right. So actually, it was about 11 years of work experience right after graduating engineering, MBA, 11 years of work ex in the corporate world, 10 years in a bank, like you rightly said. So in today's parlance, it's a very long period to be in one company, actually, right? But having said that, I think the bug of entrepreneurship was within me. And like you rightly said, it was about building things, right? And it was always about creating, being creative, and that was the reason I quit my job and I wanted to sort of be let loose to some extent. That was the reason I created this company called FinCash, which was in the online wealth management space. That was obviously a direct transcendent of my work experience for a couple of years, but obviously things didn't work out for various reasons. Market, regulations changing, the funding scenario had changed, and a lot of competition. And that's when I sort of decided to move on from that venture. And when I started the education business, actually there were 3 months of research period actually before I started Purple Tutor. And in fact, Yatish, he's my batchmate and wingmate from IIT Bombay. So we spent a lot of time seeing each other's faces throughout the 4 years in our journey out there, because the rooms were a couple of a couple of rooms from each other we were actually staying, so there was obviously some natural liking to each other, the sort of connect we had, right? And when he presented that idea, it was really new age, and we knew that whatever the parameters were at that point of time, we were very clear that there were some problems in the edtech space, and technology was the way to solve it, right? And when he presented that idea to me, we obviously spent about a couple of months of research, like I said. When we spent that research period, talking to people, VCs, customers who we thought could be potential customers rather, we realized at that point of time we were solving a compelling problem, right? And that when I put down in front of my checklist, it was like a go at that point in time that this needs to be solved and you need to take the plunge.
Right. On a related note, there's always a lot of stigma attached to failing in India. Yeah. Whereas in the US, in the Bay Area, it's a badge of honor.
Right.
I think India has that in common with China, and I think Jack Ma was someone who had come out and said this as well. He wore his failures on his chest. Right. Was that something that was weighing on your mind? I know it wasn't a failure as such, but it was a second start, because FinCash was something which was in an area that you were familiar with. EdTech was something which was new, and again you were starting out. Was there fear? And if there was, what is it that you did to kind of overcome that and say that, hey, I'm just going to double down on this?
Right. I don't think it was fear, frankly, the way I look at it, Raj. I think the decision at that point of time was to go back in industry and to continue the journey of entrepreneurship, right? And I think the decision was fairly easy when you thought that, listen, I've spent about 2-3 years learning the ropes out here, right? And then there has to be continuation there to extend that learning,
Right.
right? Failure. Now, secondly, the other part is failure is part of, I think, every entrepreneur's journey, right? And I don't think there's any entrepreneur who has not failed, right?
Absolutely.
And as an entrepreneur, you are the daily job of an entrepreneur is to fight against the tide, right? Because you're solving a problem which others don't want to solve, right?
Right.
You're searching and giving a solution which is not the accepted norm, right? So
Right.
it has to be in your DNA to sort of to go against the tide whenever possible, right? And I think as an entrepreneur you realize that. So I think every entrepreneur fails, goes through failures, and I think you've got and the ability of the entrepreneur to take this into their stride is very, very important,
Right.
because you will have your ups and downs, and it'll happen daily, right?
Right.
So that's what I would like to look at when I look at my journey, and at that point in time. So I think every failure is a stepping stone towards success, and I think the most important takeaway out there is don't repeat your mistakes.
Oh, very well. Very well put. On that note, I think it's a good segue for you to tell us what problem Purple Tutor is solving, and just a little more insight into how you went about building a Purple Tutor.
Right. I think there were a couple of things, Raj, frankly, when we started. Firstly, was the fact that when we looked and spent this 3 months of research period, like I said, and talked to parents in US, Europe, South Asia, all over the world, right? And we realized that, there's a disparity between the school curriculum and the requirement of children, what they're being taught, and the skills required for the future when they're going to graduate, let's say post-graduate, 10, 15 years from now, right? Because technology was just completely changing the world. I mean, you rewind 20 years, Facebook didn't exist, Google didn't exist. I mean, Google was just starting off at that point
Right.
of time. I remember creating my Gmail account sitting in my computer lab, at that point in time. But the fact was, these companies were nowhere there. It was Exxon and, Microsoft, yes, existed. But today you look at it, the biggest company in the world are tech companies, right? The world
Yeah.
is changing. 20 years from now, it's going to be even further. It's going to be
Right.
even more darker, the change that is going to be there, right?
Hmm.
So the fact is, what transcends time is skills. Children need to know skills, not just basic knowledge. 20 years ago, the computer science languages of Fortran or C.
Hmm.
It's JavaScript, maybe Python, and maybe 20 years, 10 years from now, it'll be something else, maybe in some other code name, some fancy name that exists, right? So there was one problem of the school curriculum, and the other part was that live classes were the way to go. We realized when to
Right.
solve the problem, right? Because bandwidth had become available to do live classes. 10 years ago, it was all
Right.
about pre-recorded content. But I think when you look at these two, they were one part of the problem. I think what we really wanted to go after was personalization. How to personalize the journey of every learner, right? And typically, if you see the self learning platforms where the user just directly interacts with a piece of technology, is when self learning exists, because you can go back and forth, and there is some, like, I mean, you would have given some competitive exams like a GMAT or something. They're adaptive
Right.
in nature, right? They
Yeah.
adapt to the learner, and the difficulty level increases, right? That is that's personalization to one extent, right?
Right.
But how do you personalize the journey of a user, right? For example, a very simple way I'd give you, which is a class 3 problem. I mean, for a student, typically, if a student is not able to solve mathematical problem, let's say in multiplication,
Hmm.
it is quite possible he's not understood addition well, actually, because multiplication is a series of additions, right?
Wow. Right.
Right? And what would happen in most cases like this is that regular teachers would just keep on dumbing down and sort of, trying to reteach multiplication in different ways, whereas our technology is going to detect, no, there's a problem in addition, go back
Right.
and actually teach him addition again. And once he's got that, he's going to very easily get how to multiply, right?
Right.
So what the technology does here is it is able to sort of really enhance the learner, choose the most efficient learning path, right, for a child. Now, for example, giving you another example, you as a child may be very interested in cars or aeroplanes, whereas a girl child may be interested more in dolls or something. Now, if I sort of just I teach a concept and I do an activity, and I do an activity that's something that you like, maybe cricket or a cars, you're going to be that much more eager to solve it, right?
Right.
A normal human teacher will just sort of stick to the regular set of problems. That's the difference that AI is going to bring in, the high level of personalization. Obviously, the very crude examples to give you a glimpse of what the AI seeks to solve, but we believe that personalization is the key to solving learners, I would say engagement, and to make sure that learning outcomes are met.
Right.
So that's what we
So
want to do in Purple Tutor.
right. So from your perspective, do you think personalization and how the way that Purple Tutor goes about addressing personalization issues among their students, is that the right to win for Purple Tutor? Because I'll tell you where this question is also coming from. From a layman's perspective, there's a lot of companies out there now which are providing, quote unquote coding services and platforms kind of pushing parents to adapt that. Where do you think in this market is the right to win for anybody who's trying to provide something similar?
Right. I think you've hit the nail on the head, Raj. Firstly, I think there are dime a dozen platforms, and I think there's a lot of credit to White Hat Junior to them actually to sort of set up and create the market. Actually, they were one of the first movers in this business, and they were able to scale very rapidly and create it. So, I think that's one part to it, right? I think the other part is because of that, you saw a lot of Me Too platforms mushroom up. In fact, we had started up like just after White Hat, actually. So, in fact,
Right.
they were seed funded at that point of time, when we started. There were a lot of players that started much later also. So, we were very early on. But I think while you may have a lot of Me Too players, I think every player needs to be differentiated in a couple of ways. One is that the K-12 space is slightly different from the professional learner space because that is more transactional, and here it is sort of a continuous engagement over time, right? K-12, 12 years, you potentially
Right.
have a user that can be with you for a number of years, right? That's one
Right.
particular difference one needs to note, because what that means is that your retention metrics must be right, and your a lot of focus must go towards retention, right? And retention
Right.
happens by high quality delivery, right?
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, the learner must be satisfied, and the parent here who's paying a lot of money must be assured that yes, there are things being met which are promised, right? And if you ask me in the long run, yes, if you have a moat which is created by technology, which is in this case what we are trying to do is personalization. Every platform here on coding may offer you courses, right? And we'll say that okay, you learn this way, and they'll have the whole regular documents. But if we are able to personalize the journey of the learner, I think it's the engagements levels are going to be far higher than could be imagined. So we feel
Right.
definitely that that is the way to win the market.
No, I think that's so brilliantly put, Gaurav. Just to add another point to it, right? People talk about a moat all the time, and usually it's defined in a certain way. Some people do it well, some people they don't. But one thing which actually stands out from an investor standpoint is that the moat is fine, but on the top of the moat, if you have soldiers protecting on top of that, right, which is the team aspect of it all,
Yeah.
that's what makes for an enterprise to go really big. It's also something that shone really bright to me the first time we spoke. A big part of that was that you really brought in women educators into the fold, right? And for anyone who's a student of economics at this point, you realize what a big impact women can have, and where India has been lacking. I think Bangladesh has exceeded India in terms of GDP per capita purely because they got a lot of urban women in workforce participation. It's not something that we have been very successful at. By we, I mean India. I don't mean Purple Tutor. Purple Tutor has done that, right?
Yeah.
I'd love to kind of know your mindset behind adopting that approach. It's generally been quite successful, but
Yeah.
where did you start from in order to do this and to know that this would make for a very strong team on top of the moat?
Right. I think definitely. I mean, I always say the people are your most important, resources in any company, right? Especially in a startup, and when you talk about women educators, we definitely felt that this was the right way to go, and we typically are women heavy when we realize that, the connect that children have to men is a little higher, they're a little softer in their approach, right? For various things, right? And to point to note is that when we sort of figured out that, so today India produces about 2 lakh graduates, right? The problem is that, yeah, I mean, deeper down when you go, there are countries with a far lower amount of graduates, but they can code much better, and that's a
Right.
fact, right? I mean, we have a lot of colleges but not the quality, right? So what it does mean is that you have a large pool of people that are having a basic degree in place, but their skills might not be so great, right, at the end of the day. Uh, but having said that, they have certain knowledge, right? They are there, they're sitting in various cities, tier 2, tier 3, tier 4 cities in India, right? But they have those basic qualifications in place. when we went about it, we sort of ensured there's a very good stringent selection process, right? So you go through right from a basic communications interview to basic concept checking, after that to a deeper concept checking with somebody who's sort of who's trained in that field, and then there's a proper demo round, right? We sort of test teaching skills, and after that a written test. So there's 5 stages that every teacher goes through, and we get filtered is a good quality, let's say, educator to some extent, right? Whom we can work on and build, right? That's the one pillar that we work on to actually get the right teachers by the selection process. The second pillar that we've actually believed in, Raj, is the fact that to train these educators, right? Because we realize that you need to train them, right? And they have the
Right.
basic knowledge in place, but they may be teachers, they may not know teaching so well for whatever reason, right? So what we've done is we've broken down our trainings into 3 categories. One is that you have the lesson plan training, which is the whole course curriculum. The
Mm-hmm.
other is the whole operations training, how to sort of manage the Zoom and the other tools that are used. And the third
Right.
is whole class experience training, right? To make sure that you're interacting, the softer skills are right, so that the student has a great experience, right?
Right.
And the third part we look at is the constant observation and monitoring, right? To make
Mm-hmm.
sure that the students are progressing well, teachers are delivering well, and there's constant flowing back, feedback flowing back to teachers, right? And
Right.
these work in tandem. Because of virtue of setting up these strong processes, I think what we have seen is, so it does take a couple of months for teachers to stabilize. It does.
Right.
Because there's a fair degree of commitment required if you can see the training requirements, etc., right? Which ultimately leads to the whole fact that, so there are 2 parts. One is that, like I said, it's K-12 retention metrics matter, so you need to have
Right.
good quality teaching happening, right? But at the same time, if teachers are extremely well committed, what we have seen is the attrition rate. When we look at our numbers, it's like almost like almost like a 1% number per month. So we don't have attrition happening in the company
Right.
because of this fact. Because at some point of time, when teachers also spend a couple of months with us, they realize it's a great platform, the culture is great, and sitting at home in a tier 3 city, they are flexible working hours. They're women who are sort of in their marriages, they've had a child, they want to get back to work, but they don't want full-time jobs, but they have this
Right.
great skill set to be able to, they have that computer science knowledge with them and they can teach. It's a
Right.
great outcome for them, right, at the end of the day.
Right.
So
No,
yeah.
I think that makes a huge difference as well, right? I think another thing that I'd actually get surprised very positively was the amount of training that you guys put in the teachers, right? Which is, I think, probably one of the reasons why you have 70% of revenues coming from outside of India. I think it's
Yeah.
it's even more than that. Was that by design that you thought that, hey, I have to reach a global audience, so I need to kind of have that training, that groundwork in place. Otherwise, I will not be able to connect. I might be able to connect with an Indian student, but I might not be able to connect with somebody who lives outside of India. You've kind of made that culture stick, right? Their training, and that has been a big push. So I just wanted to kind of know how much that was by design, or how much of that you kind of double down on once you start looking at the trends.
It was actually by design, Raj. By
Wonderful.
right upfront. Yeah. It was quite by design. In fact, what we did was we started testing international students, right? If I remember correct, from October, November of 2019, just about a month and a
Right.
half, 2 months when we started the platform. And it took us a good 7 months to get to 100 paying students, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
And we got in international students from US, South Asia, even one or two from Europe initially, and we were
Right.
testing them and we were testing waters. In fact, Rajat, who's our chief product officer, used to take classes at that point in time, right? This was
Oh,
to ensure that curriculum was sort of well designed. I was the salesperson for the first 70 customers on the platform, right, to ensure that we knew the requirements, right, and we were able to hear those customers out, right. So it was actually done by design. We spent a good 6 months to actually understand this market, and we really realized that, okay, what are the sort of requirements for teachers, what are the requirements of the other parts of the process, right? And we did, when we sort of figured all this out, the permutation combinations, the variations required, we actually launched international around June of 2020. A good 7-8 months after sort of setting up shop operations. But most of it was, like I said, by design, and then sort of we just moved strength to strength. We really
right.
realized, and the fact of the matter is, this is a global product. It's
Mm.
not an India-centric demand. And I think the other part one needs to realize is the fact that India is realized or known as a power in the IT field globally, right?
Right.
And Indians are believed to be good people in that field. So when you have educators, you want educators to be in India. Indian teachers are well recognized that way. Then
Right.
accessibility is very high.
Right. I'll turn to customer acquisition strategies for a bit here, because you guys were different even in the sense that you were trying to acquire a customer which was global, right? And we've seen, I think, which is the bad side of how things can kind of turned out.
Yeah,
On the customer acquisition front, a lot of companies in this space were using fear of missing out,
yeah,
right? Among parents, that hey, if you don't teach coding to your kids, which is the future, they are going to miss out, right? That's not something that you guys did, because you were already, that fear is maybe a little bit more in Indian parents than
yeah.
it is outside of India. And it's not a strategy that you were even close to, right? I think a lot of Purple Tutors, new acquisitions were a lot on word of mouth and a lot of referrals. So what would you say, what, in your opinion, because you've reached out to, users all over the globe, what is a long-term sustainable customer acquisition strategy in EdTech at this point?
Right, right, right. I think there are two, three parts to it, Raj. Firstly, I've never believed that FOMO is the way to sort of onboard customers, like you rightly said.
Right.
It is strategies to some extent in India where fear is sold, and the basic selling point is, you were here as a parent, but you want your child to be at the same place, right? You obviously want to see
Right.
him upgrade in your life. So I think the positioning needs to be better, right? And I think the point to make to the parent here is that you're talking about a skill upgradation for the child, right? And a huge improvement in prospects. He's going to be really future ready, right?
Hmm.
And he's going to learn the skills of the future, right? And I think the focus that we have is not just learning coding or computer science, Raj. It's also about skills and skills such as problem solving, logic building, creativity, and the pitch that we have is, cognitive development, starts as the early as like 2 years old, right? I mean,
Right.
but you really can't teach a child who's 2 years old. You've got to start at 6, because at 6 you've got two things that are working out. One, they can follow instructions, and two, they can sit through a class,
Right.
right? So you start at 6 years old, and see, the idea is never to build an IT engineer at Purple Tutor. That's
Hmm.
not the idea is to arouse curiosity. The idea is to build the skills in children and to make sure that they have constant learning throughout their journey with Purple Tutor. We are not here to make experts in IT. I think
Right.
that's a clear proposition from my side. It's always about skills. Like I said, 20 years ago the language was Fortran. Today it's JavaScript, Python. Tomorrow it could be something else. We don't know.
Hmm.
You know, the idea is skills will transcend time,
Right.
and that's very important.
Right.
Yeah,
These would be when you reach out to these new users, parents, right? They would have likely heard similar pitches before, right? Because you guys were not the first mover in the space. So, and that's had its advantages and disadvantages. On one front, there'd be a lot of investors who've taken positions. On the other side, there are parents who are not so satisfied. So there is an opportunity there. I wanted to know from your perspective, net, not being the first mover, has that been advantageous or disadvantageous for you guys?
I think there are two sides to it, and the disadvantage is that you sort of at times have parents who've already been reached out, right? It's always easier to convince a parent when you're the first mover, right? It is, and you have to be frank about it, right? But having said that, there've been a lot of companies that have sort of been second movers and have made it really big. Think of Google, yeah. I mean, as an example, there were so many search engines before that. I remember in the 90s called Alta Vista and all those, and they never
Yeah.
survived. But Google made it all the way through. And I think the fact is that today, when I look back at our journey, I think one of the things that we really focused on was high quality teaching, right?
Right.
All the systems processes, because we knew that once we got the customer in the classroom, they would realize the difference in our trial class, right?
Right.
And once they realize the difference in quality, they will definitely sign up with us, right?
Right.
So we focus towards the right parameters that we thought would be critical to our business, right? And I think that's been very very sort of rewarding for us. And in fact, even when you talked earlier about the whole retention piece and how do we look at it, it also is about quality, right? Like I said, it's K-12. It's not professional upskilling, which is a one-time thing, at times where you sort of
Right.
come and go. You got to be thinking about constantly upgrading the child and engaging them, throughout their journey. So I think it was a lot about just making sure quality is right, so that you're able to differentiate yourself from the others. So
Right.
while there, I think there are two sides. I mean, both you have advantages and you have disadvantages.
Right.
Being second mover.
Right. Another thing, I think all of the startups that we've seen recently, right, they've been a product of what we call Web 2.0.
Mm-hmm.
And now we're seeing this huge move towards Web 3,
Yeah.
right? I wanted to get your perspective on how you think the impact of Web 3 is going to be on the edtech space. It's going to matter from the point of view of imparting the education, but also for the people who are in it, right? Because generations change along with different versions of the internet. So I just wanted to get your thoughts around the Web 3.0 space and edtech.
So the way I think about that part, I think it's going to be very critical because you think about it, the amount of data that is getting generated, Raj, right, on the internet and every field that we look at it, right. I think the future is just about data and how well companies are going to use it, right? And if you look at it the way we are looking at building an AI platform, every AI platform needs a large amount of data, right, to power its
Mm-hmm.
AI models, and that's how machine learning happens at the end of the day, right? So I think, and like I said about personalization, this AI focus towards personalization, so there is a clear linkage of how we're going to use this whole data and AI piece in our business. And at least in the future of edtech, I am very vocal and I'm very clear about the fact that, yeah, there is a bit about a lot of what we call land grab, getting to the customer. But I think sustaining the customer is also equally very important, right? At the end of the day,
Right.
right? And sustaining of the customer is going to happen through when you're going to be able to give the right solution, right? And that
Mm-hmm.
solution is today with the plethora of choices, it's going to be a lot about personalization, right?
Right.
I mean, or you like a dish, you may have multiple restaurants, right? If today there's one restaurant, you'll probably just go to that one. But if you've got 10 available, then think about the answer, right? You're going to go to the one that you find the best, right? So the
Right.
one that suits to your taste, which is personalization,
Right.
right? And that's what's going to happen in the edtech space also. So I think it's going to become
Yeah.
very, very prevalent, especially with the amount of data that companies should use going forward.
Right. Just to kind of quickly recap that piece, I think because that's a very, very important piece that you actually stepped on, which is that personalization, because it's going to be idiosyncratic to every child, right? And development of everyone's individual personality is going to be so important going into the future. I think I was reading somewhere that I think 60% of high school students now will be working in jobs which are not even in careers which are not even there right now, right? So how do you prepare for a future that you don't know which way it will be, right? I think the only way to kind of do that is to develop those skills internally, to have those critical thinking abilities, which will transcend all of the developments, right? So that you can adapt yourself to different careers. I wanted to get your thoughts on how quickly the future is evolving, and like I said, there are kids are preparing for futures and for careers that don't even exist at this point, right?
Right.
And I know Purple Tutor is a platform which wants to get kids future ready that way. How do you explain that to a parent and the importance of that while kind of not trying to, do a FOMO kind of an approach to all of this?
Right. A very deep question, Raj, frankly, firstly, I think, and it's a worldwide problem, right? How do you sort of really explain to a parent, how sort of to convince them that this is the way to go? But if you see, I think the indicators are already there with us. Last year,
Right.
the NAP National Education Policy 2020 introduced coding from class 6 being the first indicator, right? And globally, many countries already have computer science as part of school curriculum, right?
Right.
Obviously, in the future, schools are going to use technology overall, and COVID has made that change. I think learners worldwide. If you look at any data, 90% plus learners were affected at the peak at any point of time during this COVID. That in
Mm.
terms of school closures, etc., and they were at home, they had to use technology, Zoom, etc., and that has sort of become a common parlance today, right?
Right.
Um, and the way I look at it, right, when you asked that, how do you explain this whole future ready concept, right? And I think there's going to be a paradigm shift. I'll tell you the way I think about it because the future is going to be more about skills than knowledge. And why do I say that, right? Because unlike 20 years ago, knowledge was something not available instantly. Today, knowledge is available instantly. You can Google anything, right?
Right.
Could you do that 20 years ago when Google didn't exist, right? I mean, it was
Right.
not possible. You had to remember so many more things. The world has changed, and what that means is that it's about a lot about or more about skills than just about knowledge, because knowledge has become instantly available,
Right.
right? And that is a paradigm shift, by the way.
Right.
And this has happened because of the advent of the internet, right? So I'm not sort of demeaning or sort of lowering the real importance of knowledge. I'm sort of relatively trying to say that skills are going to be more important than just knowledge, because knowledge has become sort of well readily available, and you can just
Right.
Google it, get it there. Yeah, fine, learn from it, assimilate it. But skills are going to be more important, and that's why the whole focus on skill building,
Right.
right? If you have a child who's good at problem solving today, he's going to be good at problem solving tomorrow.
Right.
I mean, that's the sort of key tenet that we work with.
It's also the reason that the entire pedagogy around rote learning, right, which was grounded in Indian education, that is just getting shoveled back, right? Everyone is now trying to focus more on skills than knowledge because of all the reasons that you said.
Absolutely.
Great. Final question. Okay, we're gonna do a lighter one at this point, but it's an important question because we have a lot of young founders who will look up to you, who will want to know more about the startup space and to work with you. Uh, because you've kind of been in the entrepreneurship game for a while, how do you maintain work-life balance, right? Because as a young founder, you will have 100 things to do, which can throw you off your game at any point in time. How do you maintain balance? I'll give you my thoughts on the same, but I would love to hear from you first.
No, very good question, Raj. And I think so. There are a couple of things, frankly. I mean, one is that this whole part around stress management, right? As a founder, you're constantly under stress. Things change, evolve. Your environment is extremely dynamic, because things can change overnight, and you are responsible as a founder to make sure the company's direction is right and
Right.
evolves as you would want it to, right? So I think this stress management becomes extremely critical, right? And there are various ways to manage it. One is your whole work-life balance. Founders do get sucked into sort of working continuously at times. I've personally worked 7 days a week at times also, right? When the demand so came.
Right.
Having said that, I think one does need to de-stress, take time with family. I think it's also a lot about maintaining physical fitness. For me personally, I've found, I mean, you're working out about 4 or 5 times a week if possible. Yoga is extremely good personally for me, as I have personally seen. I think it's a great de-stressor. You know, if I look at it, I think, and it's generally about not taking too much stress internally, and trying to do the best as possible in that situation. I think you
Right.
can't be constantly thinking about the problems. I think trying to solve them and move forward. I think stress management is extremely critical. I think uh, beyond that, exercise, eat right. I think important. Take the time off also. Once in a while, and re-energize. I think those periods of re-energizing also extremely important when you sort of disassociate from work and come back after a day or two.
Right.
There is so much of internalization that happens, and you sort of come refreshed, but not only refreshed internally as a human being, but with differentiated strategies for your work also, because you've taken that time off. So I think it's a
Right.
combination of things, but very critical for every young founder or even old ones to to do.
Yeah. No,
Frankly.
absolutely. And I think this is something that initially, when you're starting out, a lot of folks go into consulting and investment banking in their 20s. So they're used to kind of burning the candle at both ends, right? I did too. But I think the older you get, the more experience you have, you realize that your body is the hardware, your mind is the software, right? Both have to work in tandem. So whether that's exercising, getting your sleep, and everything right, it actually works in combination. You can't. It's just not practically possible to work 16 hours a day each and every day, right? So that's my 2 cents. I think in order to keep the software right, you have to take care of the hardware as well, right? Great. On that note, I would like to and thank Gaurav for taking his time, for giving us some brilliant insights on the edtech space. Gaurav, we hope to have you here a lot more. And really, thank you so much for taking the time today.
Thank you very much, Raj. Raj, it was a pleasure to be a part of this podcast. I hope it's useful to many people, and best of luck for the ones that are going to come.
Perfect. Thanks, Gaurav.